In a sense, we are all waste slaves. We all work unpaid for the waste industry, segregating our waste.
I believe in people. I mean, I certainly believe in people when they get sufficient incentive, which I think over time the incentive gets greater and greater.
Despite being behind our European neighbours in the race to recycle the most, rates of recycling in the UK are on a steady rise. For most of the public, recycling has become the 11th commandment, and it is as much as part of our everyday lives as eating and sleeping. But do we really know enough about this national issue? After all, is your time and money being spent? Nottingham is a microcosm for the UK, and like other local governments, the Nottingham City Council understand just how important the issue of recycling is.
Fundamentally, it's the right thing to do, and the thing about that is it's not always the convenient thing to do, it's not always the cheap thing to do, it's not always the popular thing to do, because actually, you don't run around on the doorsteps for elections talking about recycling. People think you're wonderful, but it's too important to put on the whims of cost, of political fancy. It's talking about the future of our planet. Might not be us, might not be the next generation, but in future it will be, so we have to do something about that.
There are many systems in place around the country to encourage recycling from residents, and making recycling as simple as possible appears to be the key. Keeping it simple means that our role ends once the lid of our recycling bin has been closed. Then it becomes the council's responsibility to ensure that our waste continues its transition back to a usable resource.
In terms of the journey of it and what happens to it, well, that's our responsibility, really. They need to put their trust in us that we deal with it properly, and which obviously we do. So I think people do understand why. I think they understand why it's important. But it's about making sure it's an everyday part of everything, just like turning the tap off is, or turning the hose off, all of that part of the sustainability thing, walking when it's only going round the corner, that whole thing, again, it's not going to change sustainability overnight, but what it is, it's part of that picture.
So everyone's a winner. It's simple, and we get that nice warm fuzzy feeling inside when we recycle, and we can sleep easy knowing that our local authority is taking care of the dirtier parts of recycling. But let's face it, nothing's that simple.
A lot of people understand the basic notion of recycling and they understand what goes into it and what it involves, but whether or not they're fully aware of the actual processes and the actual scope of what we can offer, that's another matter.
John Egan is the Sales and Communications Coordinator for WasteCycle. The company have the mammoth task of dealing with all of our recycling. At the facility in Nottingham, they separate all of the recycling and send it off to other plants where it can be processed and turned back into useful resources. This process means that we reduce the amount that we send to landfill, which is obviously less sustainable.
Generally, people, obviously, there's always more that we can do individually, but it is that personal choice, as you say. Household waste, it comes down to the individuals in the household. At the end of the day, I think it is a decision that's best left to individuals to basically get an insight at least into the argument and at least have a position on it, so that if they do choose one way or the other, at least it's an informed decision they're making. So, and I'm sure everyone would act in the appropriate manner if they are fully informed.
Well said, John. Given the right information, people will make the right decision. But the journey of your recycling doesn't stop here. Although WasteCycle boasts an impressive 92% recycling rate of all the waste they sort, the remaining 8% gets sent somewhere altogether more controversial. This is the East Croft Incinerator in Nottingham. It's an EFW, which basically means it creates energy from waste. They're a form of waste disposal that splits public opinion, despite the technology that they use coming on leaps and bounds in recent years. Carl Starkey is the General Manager at East Croft.
Unfortunately, there's a stigma attached to these sort of plants from the 70s, really, but they're very clean now. In fact, if you look at today, it looks like we're not running, but as you've seen, we've been around the plant, you can see you looked inside the furnace and we are running. So.
But let's start with the basics. The incinerator works by collecting large amounts of waste that either hasn't been sent to be recycled or cannot be recycled. It is separated and dropped into the actual incinerator by a mechanical claw, which operates all day to avoid the plant getting overrun with rubbish. It then gets burnt at temperatures of 900 degrees centigrade, and the steam this produces is turned into heating and electricity. As well as creating valuable energy without burning fossil fuels, this process also greatly reduces the amount of waste we send to landfill.
There's probably about 4% actually ends up going to landfill out the whole process, and that is treated. It's called air pollution control residue. Unfortunately, that's classed as hazardous, so that can't be used in road building. That gets treated on our landfill site before it goes to landfill.
EFWs like Eastcroft have the backing of local government, but anti-incineration groups still think that the process isn't safe.
They probably will never agree, but I mean, as a company, we want to recycle everything, but there's a reality, there's a cost issue as well with the cost for recycling is quite, can be quite high, and that knocks on for the taxpayer. So it's how much the taxpayer is willing to give. So there's a whole thing there, but we are moving in the right direction, and EFW is the way.
The burning that they do is producing more carbon emissions for the amount of electricity and heat they produce than if it was produced in in a coal-fired power station. Most of the waste they're actually burning is waste that could and should be recycled. So it's actually wasting material that could much better be reused or recycled.
There is a strong argument to suggest that even with the advances in technology, incineration is still having a big impact on climate change. Incineration does drastically reduce the amount we send to landfill, but it also affects how much we can recycle. Campaigners like Nigel Lee also think that the contracts the incinerators have with local authorities is affecting this.
As a company, they've got a lease that goes up to, I think it's about 2060 or 2070, that sort of time. So the contract with the council to take the waste goes to 2030. But they would have the contractual rights, the legal right to carry on operating. But the question is, do we, as a community, want to send our waste there after 2030? Given that they're producing as much carbon dioxide as if you're producing electricity by coal.
But it wasn't safe then, it's not safe now, it's just less dangerous and less obviously dangerous. There are some people that view incineration and maybe the waste department at Nottingham City Council as a necessary evil. That they're stuck with it, they've got it, and so they might as well make the best of it. I can understand that attitude, particularly if they're locked into a contractual arrangement that means that they have to pay for it anyway. Then, well, if we're going to pay for it, we might as well use it.
Campaigners like Nigel and Shlomo both believe that the key to better recycling isn't necessarily simplicity. Although incinerators do recycle the leftover metals after the burning process, environmentalists feel that better segregation of recycling at home is more beneficial.
The zero waste approach that I would advocate is for more sorting, and the more that something is sorted, the more useful and the more valuable it becomes.
The success of more segregation before recycling is sent to places like WasteCycle can be seen at Nottingham Trent University. They've won 2 awards in the last 3 years for being the greenest university in the country, and more separation of waste is key.
So in Newton Building, for example, where we are, you will see recycling stations. So you've got the general waste, then you've got the plastics and cans, and then you've got the cardboard and paper. And really having those stations really help to engage with staff and students walking past them to segregate the waste at source. So that's really helped. And when we have a breakdown of our stats for different buildings, we find that buildings like Newton that have got recycling stations have a much better recycling rate than, for example, Belgrave that just have normal bins.
So perhaps recycling wasn't as simple as we first thought. There's no argument when it comes to the future of our planet that recycling is the best thing to do. But are we going about it the best way? Incineration is certainly one of the most effective ways of dealing with our waste, but let's not forget they will always need rubbish to burn, and the more we recycle, the less incinerators will have. The more we separate recycling, the more valuable it becomes. But do you really want to give up more of your time for the 11th commandment when there are still so few incentives? The possibilities really could be endless, but only if we make a move towards zero waste. In the meantime though, the decision to recycle is in your hands. After all, it's your planet.